Hi, I'm Marty Levinson. Welcome to Northtown News Magazine with Avi Myers.
Hello, I'm Marty Levinson, and welcome to the Northtown News Magazine.
Hi, I'm Marty Levinson. Welcome to the Northtown News Magazine.
Welcome to Northtown News. I'm Marty Levinson.
For the identity of the real Marty Levinson, stay tuned to the Northtown News Magazine.
Come on, baby, don't you wanna go? Come on, baby, don't you wanna go? Back to that lemon light city, sweet Hope, Chicago. 224 446. Come on, baby, now get your business fixed. Come on.
Hi, I'm Marty Levinson. Welcome to the Northtown News Magazine show with the greatest cameraman around, Sonny Hirsch, and your host, Avi Myers.
Thank you, Marty. Avi Myers, Northtown Neighborhood News Magazine, a presentation of Sonny Hirsch and myself. Dial us up on the web at www.ntnm.org. Community policing is still alive and well. Despite any reports you've heard, they're early. Even if funding is completely cut for camps, that doesn't mean the end to community policing. And I can't speak for every district, but the 24th district, our commander, James Roussel, who is one of the greatest commanders we've ever had, which is saying a lot, because we've had a lot of really outstanding commanders, plans to keep having monthly meetings with the police officers and the public, regardless of what the budget situation is. And we do hope those 3 employees in the camp's office and all the districts are able to stick around. At this point, it's a pleasure to have somebody for the first time in the studio, who we've met before at the Greater Chicago Jewish Fest, and somebody I've interviewed each of the last 2 years, and somebody who's actually I was follow their work on Facebook, and and we're talking about Gary Kenzer from Honest Reporting. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you, Avi?
First of all, thank you, Gary, and you're actually a national organization.
We're
an
We're
international.
an international, correct.
And you're based in Skokie.
The national office for North America is based right in Skokie.
Yeah.
Yep. Been there for 7 years.
Which is pretty cool. And, by the way, one thing I've noticed is the stuff on Facebook coming from Israel? Because, I'm a night owl, so I see the stuff coming out at 2, 3 in the morning.
Yep. From Israel.
Okay, so basically if I were to email Honest Reporting, you're not going to see that. But if I email Gary Kenzer...
Right, I'll see it a little quicker. So when you emailed me to confirm from Facebook it was our blogger that forwarded it to me.
Oh, gotcha. I was wondering about that. Okay, so tell us about Honest Reporting. I mean, honestly, you're into honesty in reporting, which would be nice if it existed.
What we're all about is is twofold, actually. One is telling the other side of the story.
Yeah.
It's training people to get used to the fact that what you see may not necessarily be what it is.
Yeah.
I train hundreds of audiences a year on how to read stories and read into stories and understand. For example, there was just an attack today that Israel launched an offensive, on Syria. So when people hear offensive, they think, the poor Syrians who are being attacked by Israel. But they don't realize that Syria really, launched the first missile.
Yeah.
Okay, now that it's close to 900 missiles from our wonderful neighbors in the Middle East since January. But offensive has this tone about it, and it's really understanding words and understanding how words are used.
Yeah.
I would say to the listeners, what's the word that's been used for, I don't like using the word, but I'll say it, intifada. Okay? So unless you speak Arabic, you're not going to know the word intifada unless you learned it from the media, right? Intifada, does anybody know what intifada really means?
Actually, I don't.
Okay, but you heard of it.
I've heard of it plenty.
And I'm sure you heard of it from the media.
Plenty.
So intifada really is, and there's not a great English word for it, but it's really like a spontaneous response and to defend yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's spontaneous, and it's a very political term, but most people don't know where it came from. Obviously, they got it from the media.
Yeah.
So there's very important things to look at very carefully. I brought this article
Please.
that actually just appeared in the Washington Post the Washington McClatchy News Bureau.
Okay.
And it's a very important article because it says Israel takes fire from Syria, Gaza, vows to escalate if it continues. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's important. But if you read a little bit further down, I just want you to see this. 4 years ago, the international community condemned Israel's Operation Cast Lead, accusing Israel of using unnecessary force in Gaza in a 3-week operation that left more than 13,000 Palestinians and 13 Israelis dead.
Wow.
So, what's wrong with that line there?
Well, it sounds to me like it almost sounds like they're saying that we killed 13,000 of them.
Which, first of all, was the number is considerably inflated. Actually, the initial numbers were about 1,200.
Okay.
Then it was proven that it was about 450.
Yeah.
Okay, but this is an exaggeration completely. Okay, so it looks like it's unfair, disproportionate response.
Yeah.
Okay, so we see a lot of these disproportionate responses all the time. But people need to look very carefully at stories. I will bet you most people don't know
Yeah.
that what's the most important thing when you read an article, whether it's online or in a newspaper? What's the most important thing that draws you into a
Well,
story?
people get drawn in by headlines.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the headline is the first thing that you see and the last thing that's in your mind, right?
Right.
So that's going to either draw you into the article, but that's not written by the person who writes the article.
No, not at all. And having worked for a newspaper and still publishing one, you've got a specific person whose job it is to write headlines, and for different departments.
Exactly. So people are drawn in to an article based upon somebody else's words. Same thing with photographs.
Yeah.
You know, one of the reasons why we were started, I don't know if you know the history
No, I
behind.
really don't.
Well, so Honest Reporting was founded in 2000
Okay.
by an incident that happened on Erev Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah.
And the incident is something that we all know is when that second round called the Intifada started. And it was that day, right? Erev Rosh Hashanah. It was really a terrible, terrible day. And a young man was pulled from a cab as he was going right before Yontif to the Kotel.
Yeah.
Okay, do you know who that young man was?
No.
Tuvia Grossman.
Really?
Do you know who Tuvia Grossman is?
Not really.
He's from Rogers Park.
What? Really?
He's from Rogers
Yeah.
Park, from this area.
Wow.
Okay, now he lives in Israel, lives in Tel Aviv, now with his wife and child, and
Yeah.
he's a lawyer. Surprise,
Okay.
surprise, you know?
Yeah.
But a wonderful story, and I really encourage people to go. But the headline that ran with the picture,
Yeah.
and maybe people will remember the picture, it was a soldier standing with a club, and this young man sitting on like a rock. You couldn't tell that it was a rock, and he was bloody on his right side of his face. And the caption said, a Israeli policeman and a Palestinian on the Temple Mount. Okay, so now you got to think to yourself, let's look at the picture. Let's talk about what was in that picture.
Yeah.
2 cars, a bottom portion of a gas station sign from Israel.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at the Temple Mount, you're not going to find any cars.
Been there. No cars.
I mean, people, that's pretty much a world
You gotta
famous.
walk.
You got to absolutely walk. And there's no, first of all, if there's a gas station, it's not going to be from Israel. No, okay. But there's a gas station sign on the bottom portion of the sign. So how could that have happened?
Yeah.
Okay. So obviously it was the media frenzy of the day to
Yeah.
catch the excitement and the enthusiasm and to get a story out.
Yeah.
So that's what really started our organization. And a number of students from London
Yeah.
were so outraged at the fact that this was so wrong that they then created this organization that later became honestreporting.com.
Very cool. And by the way, there have been so many incidents like that. I mean, well, first of all, in terms of, and you know, when I start arguing with people about news and all the rest of it, I make it a point to never watch TV news because I know I'll never get anything that's straight. Correct. Not to mention in depth. I also learned in the early days, I used to get all 4 Chicago newspapers, plus the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. I used to read them all.
Wow.
Okay. And, well, I didn't do much else.
Okay. Got it.
I didn't read the feature section, though, that I'll say.
Okay.
Or Ann Landers or any of that stuff. But no, I was reading news. And to this day still, with the web, I'll make it a point to read things like the Washington Post or the Washington Times, whichever the more conservative, that or the Examiner. The New York Times I actually have a digital subscription to, the Chicago Tribune. And through things like Real Clear Reporting, you get links to all these different stories throughout. So I try to make it a point that if I'm actually going to write or talk about a story, I want to read 4 or 5 different versions of the same story.
Sure.
Because when I was a young reporter, and I still remember during my first presidential campaign that I covered, I would be in an event. And in those days, you had a phone in the story.
Right.
There were only so many payphones.
Sure.
So I would be standing there, and the guys from the Trib and the Daily News and the Sun-Times and the Today were smarter about it than I was. So they were over there at the phones, and I was listening to what they were calling in. And I was trying to figure out where they were, because they certainly weren't at the same event I just attended.
Very, very true. You know, it's very important for people to really read stories with almost like an extra sense, because it's very deceiving what you see. And what do they say about photographs? They paint 1,000 words.
Yeah.
So photographs can tell so much, and if you don't really understand what you're looking at, you would never know. I'll give you another great example. There was, before Gilad Shalit was released, there was a Twitter feed. And it was basically talking about that Israel and Hamas are coming together to talk about the release of Gilad Shalit many years ago as he was kidnapped in Gaza.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that statement?
Doesn't sound right at all.
Well, first of all, he wasn't kidnapped in Gaza.
Yeah.
He was kidnapped in his own country.
In Israel.
In Israel.
Yeah.
Okay, but most people never caught that subtle difference.
Yeah.
And it's big difference when you're captured in your own country versus you're in somebody else's land.
Yeah, that's like yes, big time.
That's a big mistake. Big mistake. So you have to be very careful about the subtle nuances that are in papers. So now I'll tell you something. You talk about the New York Times.
Yeah.
You know, whether people like it or not, we like the New York Times because they give us more than enough work to do. We will be in business forever with the New York Times. But the New York Times is a very interesting point in their history.
Yeah.
Because now more people subscribe digitally than reading the printed paper. That's a big shift for the New York Times.
Yeah.
So now I would ask you, what's the difference between reading a story in a paper versus reading a story online?
Well, I'm a little different because I've had typesetting equipment, for almost 30 years, so I'm used to reading things off screens.
Okay.
Okay, so that's one thing.
But to the average Joe out
To the
there,
average Joe, you know what? When you've got a newspaper, you start flipping it page by page, and you can't just, jump. You see a headline, sports. You're going to hit. If you're in New York, you hit right away. The Knicks or the Yankees or whatever. But if I've got a newspaper in my hands, I'm going to grab the section I want, which would be the front page first.
Right.
And I'm going to go through it page by page. On the web, you can just flit and do whatever you want, or just, look at a little bit and just skip around much easier.
And stories that are written that of years ago when they were only in the paper, when you read a story, it was it.
Yeah.
Now stories are updated almost within seconds.
And as a matter of fact, that same story, because like you look at the Tribune, it says breaking news. It's a rewrite on the same story that they filed 20 minutes earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that we do a lot is train people to understand that you have to read very carefully. You have to understand what you're looking at and really be intelligent and have almost an extra sense when you read the stories. But the other thing is we can't assume that at the end of the day, people will know that Israel's right and the others are wrong, okay? Because it's all about messaging.
It is. And you know what? I got to tell you, friends of mine that grew up in Jewish communities have always been pro-Israel. They listened to the propaganda, and they never thought that there was any such reason why there should be 2 states in that area or that the Arabs had any real claim to it. Now I think it's just normal because that's what they hear from the news.
And look who wrote this. You don't have to say the name, but it's quite a Jewish name.
I don't have my glasses on, so.
So it's Shira Frankel.
There's a lot of that going on.
Okay. So I want people to understand that don't assume that just because it's a Jewish writer means it's going to be pro-Israel.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that's
careful.
an understatement.
You got to be very careful about that, extremely careful. So there's a lot of subtle nuances that people have to understand.
And unfortunately, very often it's the opposite way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So
we can be our own worst enemies.
We are. I mean, many times we really are. So it's very important to understand how to read the stories, what it's saying and what it's not saying.
Yeah.
Okay, and I know a lot of people just read and sort of take things at face value, and that's a danger.
No, it's a big danger, and obviously at least 68% of us have problems. But at this point, that's my political statement.
Okay.
I've got to, I got to wrap things up.
Oh,
so if
my
people
God.
would like to, 14 minutes already.
Wow.
If people would like to contact you, first of all, I know they can like Honest Reporting on Facebook.
100%.
Okay, but if people want to contact you or the organization here, or is there a way people can participate?
So
or?
they can absolutely participate. We're also looking for interns. We're looking for volunteers. We want to create educational opportunities. They could just go to the website at www.honestreporting.com. And they can also call me at 847-674-8783.
No, that sounds good. And you know what? I'm going to have you back on soon because we didn't even talk about the, the Honest Reporting of the Year award.
We didn't even do that, so we'll definitely come back.
Absolutely.
I look forward
Gary,
to it.
thank you so much
Avi,
for being
thank you.
here. And hey, check them out, Honest Reporting.